What's your opinion on how we should solve the housing crisis?
Yeah. Well, first of all, we have to stop creating cheap money. So the more money you have in the money supply, money has to find a home. And money finds home in tangible assets because there's only so many tangible assets. So I'll prove it to you. This is why gold, silver, copper, the stock market, and homes are priced more, but they're actually not worth more than they were 4 years ago. So the price of it goes up more because we're creating $8 trillion every 4 years artificially and boosting the money supply. So we have to get federal spending under control. And the Federal Reserve is just intent on continually pumping in cheap money into the market. So that's number one. Number two, at least in Arizona, we have to take back federal land from the federal government and give it to states, and we have to try to build out horizontally and not as much vertically. So I don't know if that would be popular around here, but in Arizona especially, the federal government controls actually the majority of the state of Arizona. So do you have a thought on that?
The one, I guess, thing about building out horizontally instead of vertically is that there's been a couple of theories posited around. I'm not sure if you might have seen them. It's that building out horizontally essentially means that the tax revenue in in municipalities ends up being not enough to pay for the services you're providing.
Yeah, it depends. Yeah, it depends on what community and what the income level is, right, and what your social service demand is. But I think we would all agree that there is a cost to hyper-urbanization. And hyper-urbanization is very expensive. I think you get very bad politics for it, but you don't have to agree with that. You get very dense populations. You get hyper-radical ideas. You get a lot of homelessness and a lot more crime. I think that every single person in this audience should be able to own property, have kids if they want, and get married if they want. Those things are increasingly out of reach for a generation. So it's not like, I don't think we have to overcomplicate the housing situation. I think we'd also agree on this, that if you are an asset manager with assets under management, with over $100 billion asset under management, you should not be able to buy single-family homes and rent them back to people. So that's a huge problem, is Blackstone is coming in, purchasing single-family homes and renting them back. I think that's a huge problem.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
My question is, if the Founding Fathers could somehow see America, what is one thing you think they'd be proud of that we've overcome or that we've maintained? And what is one thing you think they'd be disappointed in?
Disappointed in? Almost all of it. But yeah, look, I think what they would be most surprised, let me start with this. I think it's very well agreed upon, is the creation of this fourth branch of government, is this unelected administrative state that came up in the Woodrow Wilson presidency of the FBI, the CIA, the Department of Justice, the EPA, this unaccountable, unelected fourth branch of government that has unlimited amounts of power, that kind of operates in total violation to the promises, the moral claims of the U.S. Constitution. The moral claims of consent to the governed. Where do they get their consent from? They just operate on their own. They always exist. The machinery grinds on. Separation of powers? Not really, because they're almost above the three branches of government. Well, the thing that really troubles me the most about the fourth branch of government is another one of the claims that Madison and Hamilton and Jay made in the Federalist Papers is checks and balances. What is the check right now against this fourth branch of government? Almost nothing. It's as if now the real power is in the inner workings of these bureaucracies. One thing I think they would be really thrilled about or excited about, I think they would be shocked at how long the Constitution stood. They wrote about this in the Federalist Papers, and Thomas Jefferson basically wrote this in so many ways, he's totally misquoted and misunderstood, where people say, oh yeah, he wanted a revolution every couple of years. No, he didn't want that. What he was saying is, this form of government has a tendency not to last. The fact we still have the same United States Constitution that we had in 1787 and 1791 at both ratification of the Bill of Rights and the usual Constitution is unbelievable. That should make everyone pause and say, why? It's because the Constitution was not written for the times. It was written to stand the test of time. John Dewey, who's kind of the father of public education in America, said it's a new age. We have machines and airplanes, and we have gas-powered engines. Humanity is entering a new era. Whereas a conservative say, whoa, 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 just because you have Twitter and you can fly across the country doesn't mean human beings radically improve. We're just as selfish and greedy and broken as we were, regardless of the technology we have. In fact, the technology only amplifies how broken we actually are. It only makes evil easier. And so I think, without belaboring the point, the founders, I think, would actually be stunned at how much we have screwed up and how much of a chance we still have to revive it.
If education to fire the bad teachers, what's your definition of bad teachers?
Great question. So how many people here think you've had at least one teacher that deserves to be fired? Everyone raises their hand always. Always. So the question is, how do you find them, right? Best metric is you have teachers grade teachers and you have parental input. Here's the thing. You know the really, really bad teachers. Those have got to go. I had teachers earning $150,000 a year, barely showing up for class, teaching gym, doing nothing, being completely lazy. They're a drain on the school budget, they're a drain on the local community, and they should be fired instantaneously. The problem is, under current teacher tenure laws in certain states, in most states, they are protected by contracts designed by teacher unions that make it nearly impossible to fire bad teachers.
What about professors?
Professors, they have a system that rewards professors that want to write their book and sell it back to their class. Most college freshmen are taught by TAs, teachers' assistants, so they're getting something, they're paying for something they're not even getting. I think measuring value in a professor should be different than that of a teacher, but here's the big difference is that public school teachers in K through 12 education have to be held to a different standard than professors. It just has to be. There's more K through 12 teachers than there are professors, a lot more, almost 10-to-1 ratio.
The whole point on the TAs, they're usually doctoral students.
Yes.
That are turning into professors. So why is that a problem? How are the TAs supposed to
Because when you start to have class sizes that are 500 people and plus, when you have TAs that are not yet masters on the subject that you're paying a pretty penny on, that deserves question. Because you are going to college to learn from subject matter experts in an environment where you can dive deep into that particular topic, so on and so forth. So if I'm paying, or I'm being forced to pay, $800 for this sociology class or human studies class, and I'm getting taught by a TA with 800 people in a lecture hall this big, that there's something I think wrong with that.
I would just like to know, you being a husband, a father, and a big political figure, it's like, how do you cope with making all of those things important in your life?
You mentioned a lot, which is, I'm a big fan of Aristotle. Aristotle talked about a hierarchy of the good. When you have a lot going on, this is a good rule for young people. You got to make a hierarchy of what matters most, and you got to prioritize that thing over other things, which means, by definition, other things are going to slip aside. And realize it's not all about you. And this is one of the great, I hate the self-love movement. I hate the self-esteem movement. It's done so much damage. I think it's one of the great philosophical carcinogens in our society in so many different ways. I saw this sign the other day. They said, it's your imperfections that make you perfect. And I thought to myself, I said, well then therefore by definition, the more imperfections you have, the better you are? Or my favorite one is, the world is better because you're in it. Now, that might sound like a good message, but in reality, it should be a question. Is the world better because you're in it? Right? It should, and so it should be a question. Has the world become a better place because of you? Now, so the idea of a hierarchy of what matters most is not taught a lot to our kids. There's a big lie out there that you could have it all, and that's not true. You can't. You have to make sacrifices. You could still do a lot. You could still run a business, and you could still do things, but you have to make time for what matters most. One of the reasons why we have such a depressed generation, suicidal generation, we have such an anxious generation, a medicated generation, is they're thinking about themselves all the time. I believe a people that is not dedicated to service is a very depressed people. It's not always about you. Sometimes you have to do stuff you don't like because it's going to benefit somebody else. By the way, we just know that scientifically you're a happier person because of that. We know that, regardless of the spiritual implications or the moral implications. And so we have an entire generation that's always asked, like, how do you feel? How do you feel about that? It's actually quite irrelevant. It matters more about what you're doing. And here's a thought-provoking thing for you. Generally, what you do should dictate how you feel, not how you feel with what you do. That's a good general rule to tell a young person. Another good rule for life, which is self-control is a lot more important than self-esteem. But we do the opposite. Thank you.
What advice would you give to a young kid that wants to do something similar to what you've done with their career as far as starting Turning Point USA and just impacting people?
So I started Turning Point USA when I was 18. I never went to college and ended up being a great decision for me. I took a gap year. Not everyone in this country needs to go to college. We have way too many people going to college in our country. Strive to be a better person every single day because your character is a reflection of your soul. Learn something new every single day. It doesn't matter where you go to college. It's just a piece of paper, honestly. What matters is who you are as a person. If you want to succeed, you also must be willing to keep pushing on and enduring when things get really, really tough. Take the relationships with people that are older than you very seriously and memorialize those conversations forever. So those smartphones, I think, are destroying our country, but one thing they're good for is they're really good at recording. They're good at recording voice memos or conversations. Next time you sit down with a grandparent or a business person, record those conversations. You're going to want them. When you encounter difficulty, train yourself to blame yourself. Train yourself to say, it's my fault. What did I do wrong? That's hard. Trust me. It's really easy to blame others. It might be somebody else's fault, but find something you could have done differently. And if you get in the practice of doing that, you'll be a stronger person. The final thing is this: immerse yourself in eternal knowledge. There's two types of knowledge: practical knowledge and eternal knowledge. Practical knowledge is who's the governor. Eternal knowledge, things that never change. We also call it wisdom. The more wise you are, the more cheerful and happy you will be. You live in a wonderful country. We got problems, we got ridiculous leaders, we got all that stuff. Man, what a gift we've been given. Don't get into the whole complaining that everything around me is terrible and awful. We talked about many of that. But believe that your actions matter, apply yourself accordingly, work harder every single day. And after a decade of that, I think you'll be in a pretty good place. White privilege is a racist myth that is rooted in bigotry, trying to classify people based on their skin color. If you are a racist, you have something to apologize for. If you're a white person who is not a racist, you have nothing to apologize for. And anyone who makes you apologize just based on the color of their skin, they're the racist and you're not. It's that simple. And so this idea of our systems are racist also does not stand up against any sort of cross-examination of different ethnic groups in our country. White people, on average, if you were to classify it, and again, I don't like the over-racialization of our country, but if that's where the left wants to lead this, the facts don't even support their entire charge against our country, is that Asian Americans and Indian Americans are far wealthier on average in our country than white Americans. This idea that every single white person in the country is living a life of luxury and convenience is totally untrue. And according to not just the Hoover Institution, but US Census data and government labor data, this is the greatest statistic to dispel it, which is that a black child raised by a mother and father is more likely to succeed by every independent metric than a white child who is raised by a single mother. Now, I'm not bashing single mothers. I think that they're modern-day heroes. The point is that there's two-parent privilege in our country, not white privilege in our country. And if we're serious about rebuilding the black family, which we should be putting fathers back in the home, but be very careful to try to connect disparities necessarily with discrimination. And so there's other parts of privilege as well in our country that are non-racial privilege. For example, anyone here the firstborn child? I am. You know that you have an exponentially higher likelihood of succeeding than the second child or the third child or the youngest child? You ever heard of firstborn privilege? Probably not. How about anyone here an only child? You have way higher likelihood of succeeding. Every independent study shows this. Now, we can laugh and chuckle, of course. The point is that there are different inputs at times for why certain disparities are created. And blaming all of it on deep-seated, harbored racial resentment is not just incorrect, it's really corrosive for all of us. Instead of just looking at skin color, look at other circumstantial factors such as education, such as two-parent households. And the argument that the activists will make, and I'm sure someone here will make the argument, is that racism created those systems, right? That it was racist. And I can actually agree with part of that. Just be very specific of what systems those are. And if we're serious about improving the livelihood of our fellow countrymen, maybe we should be less focused on government welfare and more focused on work and literacy education and bringing fathers back into the home.
You don't want any immigrants speaking other languages, or you just want
No, I want the government to have an official language of the U.S. Our documents are written in English.
So what's the issue with there not being an official?
Because a nation of foreigners is not a nation, it's a colony. You're foreign to one another.
Well, that kind of goes against capitalist ideas, though.
Why?
That's all diverse. In a capitalist society, you want a free market with free choices.
Yeah, but the best ideas win. So the diversity is not the strength, the excellence is the strength.
Well, the diversity is the platform for the strength's sake.
So diversity is a temporary condition to eventually get to excellence, right?
I guess temporary.
Because if you have really bad food poison food and really good food, the good food is going to win out. So it's not the diversity of food, it's the competition of it.
I mean, sure.
Yes. If you have a football team and everyone's calling their own plays, diversity is not the strength of the football team.
Well, that's a lack of leadership and systematic institutions.
I agree. So the question is, what is a country? Is a country a set of laws, traditions, and customs, or is it just a bunch of random people living?
It's a group of people with an established system that share collective ideas and
language.
identity.
And language.
It doesn't have to be language.
Well, language is how we communicate values.
We can communicate in other ways.
How?
Google Translate. We can talk in different
Yeah, that's a little sloppy. So Switzerland has a national language, right? Hungary has a national language. China, Japan. Why do they get a national language and we don't?
Because they're based on different values than the U.S. was.
Maybe.
The U.S. was founded on freedom.
Hold on. We overplay the liberal part of our founding. There was a liberal part of our founding and a conservative part of our founding. And we have forgotten the conservative part. The conservative part is about preservation, separation of powers, and preserving a republic. The liberal parts are the Enlightenment, speech, advancement, and that's part of it. But we've completely rewritten our history. It says in the Declaration of Independence, when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands that have tied them to another, deriving from the separate equal station of power, the laws of nature and nature's God. The Founding Fathers were saying that there's a natural law that governs our entire existence. There has to be something that slows down progress for progress' sake.
So you don't think that our society could run efficiently and well if there's not a national language?
No, it's just harder. It's not an impediment. It's just stupid not to do. It's not like a deal breaker. It's just why not do it? It's hurting us. It's unnecessarily hurting us.
Hey Charlie, so I am as a young adult right now in America. I'm looking right now towards like my future, and I'm really having a hard time really seeing myself being able to do the same things like my parents have done, such as buy a house at a young age and whatnot. So, do you think there's going to be any change in in the housing market from the high interest rates and big companies and investors buying all types of properties and just renting them out to just Americans in general?
It's a great question. So 4 years ago, the average income to be able to buy a home in this country was $59,000 a year. Now it requires $106,000 a year to buy a home, and it's probably even more than that here in Vegas, is my guess. You have been robbed by the DC political class, and then big corporations like BlackRock come in and purchase these homes and then rent them back to you. Yeah, we should say that multi-trillion dollar corporations like BlackRock cannot come in and buy homes and rent them back to you. In fact, I want three very basic things for every one of you. I don't care about your politics. I want you to be able to get married, have kids, and own a home. Those three things should be in the very basic social contract for Gen Z, and that's my message. And I pray we can restore that.
Exactly. Do you think that any time in the near future that any changes in the housing market are going to take place?
Say that again.
Do you think
housing prices will probably go up before the end of the year? The Fed just announced yesterday interest rates are going down, so you guys are even more screwed. And so you're going to see a flood of buyers coming into the market right now, which means that the price of homes are probably going to go up another 5 or 10% before the end of the year.